Hey everybody, Gail here. Welcome to May's webinar um, for foster and adoptive families. This one, our topic is the role that sensory input has in our children's meltdowns. So, as parents, we're always wanting to find out what is willful disobedience and what is maybe a trauma response. So when we're looking at this thing called trauma responses, one of the things that we need to look at that maybe you haven't before is your child's sensory environment. All right. So we're trying to answer the question, what is the need behind the behavior? So in the case of a meltdown, what's going on? What does this child need? Okay. You know, we can all have examples of where on some days our child is pretty regulated, but other days they have a meltdown, right? So one of the pieces of this puzzle is having to do with the way that they process sensory information. And it turns out that we all have a certain amount of sensory input that comes in from our environment that we can tolerate before we become dysregulated. Now, this is true for children, this is true for ourselves. There can be some differences in this based on the time of day, whether you're hungry or you're thirsty, enough sleep, whether you're stressed out about something, not feeling well. But some children, for a variety of reasons, are just wired different. And when I say children, understand, children grow up and then become adults, right? So some of us are just wired differently when it comes to what we need sensory-wise in our environment. Now, experts do say that children from trauma, abuse, or neglect backgrounds, they will experience sensitivities in the way that they process sensory information. And these sensitivities can decrease their ability to handle just day-to-day kind of stress. But I want you to know that even in very loving and attentive homes, some children are just born wired for some sensory differences. Doesn't mean that the parent did anything wrong, but in our population of hurt kids, we're going to see more sensory differences because of the early environment. Okay. Now, with anything, as I said before, let's look for the need behind the behavior. What might be causing this meltdown? So we get to play detective for our kids because they're not going to understand their environment. They're not going to understand that there's too much of something in their world and it's dysregulating them, or there's not enough of something in their world and it's dysregulating them. We have to be the detective, and we have to examine our child's environment and see if we can make some adjustments if necessary. Now, I'm going to give you all some slides that you can look at. I wasn't able to do like a PowerPoint for this presentation, but we've got some slides so you can see, kind of go back and kind of see what I'm talking about. So we're going to be looking at how we can modify sensory input for our children to help them stay regulated. Okay, so we've got to talk about what sensory input is, right? So that's our senses: the smell, sound, taste, sight, touch. And then two you might not know about: proprioception and vestibular. Now, just like learning about the brain can help children understand what's happening to them during a meltdown, also when children can learn a little bit about sensory processing in them, this can help them understand themselves better too. So I'm going to explain to you in a very simplified way what sensory processing means. And I'm explaining it in this way because I want you to teach it to your children. I want you to be able to help them understand that sometimes when they melt down, sometimes when they're dysregulated, it's because of their environment and the way that their body is processing the senses in that environment. Knowing this can really take a lot of shame away from the child who may be wondering why all of a sudden I can't behave myself. And maybe for some of you parents, because children with sensory processing issues grow up to be adults with sensory processing issues, and maybe some of this will be helpful for you all. Full disclosure, I have a number of these sensory processing issues. I have sensory processing disorder, and as we go through and talk about the different senses, I'll give you some examples, how it relates to me. So I want you to think about the sensory process as if we have a cup. So picture in your mind 2 cups, okay? One's larger than the other. One's pretty big, and one's pretty small. So think of sensory processing as if you have a cup which holds the amount of sensory input in your environment. Okay? Now, some people have a big cup, some people have a little cup. If you have a big cup, it takes a lot of sensory input to fill up that cup. Okay? If you have a little cup, it doesn't take much sensory input and the cup is full or overflowing. Now, an ideal situation is that you have just enough in your cup, right? The interesting thing is that we can have a big cup for some senses and a little cup for other senses. Now, if your child's environment is too sensory rich, okay, there's too much of something, or if your child's environment doesn't give them enough sensory input, either way, this actually can reduce their ability to regulate their emotions. So it's not a willful disobedience. Why can't you sit still? Why are you running away? Why are you doing this? It's not willful disobedience. It's, in this moment, I am not able to regulate my emotions. Okay? So I want you to think about, as we go through these different senses, I want you to think about your child or some of your children and be that detective and look and see, is my child a sensory seeker in this area, or is my child a sensory avoider? Okay? So the sensory seeker would be the one who has the big cup and they want more, need more input. The sensory avoider is, no thank you, my cup's full, I don't want any more. So let's start with smells. One of my adopted sons, when he was, he's now 23, when he was about 18, he shared a story with me that he had never shared before. He told me that there were certain cooking smells that would be a trigger for him for early memories in Russia, in the orphanage. And he'd say, Mom, I'd be going about my day, having a great day, and then something would trigger me. I'd smell something, and then all of a sudden, it was like I was back in the orphanage. No, he didn't. No, he didn't say it that way. He said, I'd be going about everything fine, and then all of a sudden, something would trigger me, and my day would turn bad. So we problem solved it a little bit. And then in talking with him about it, age 18, he was like, oh, it's a smell trigger, and it made me think of being back in the orphanage. So we had to piece that together, right? Now, if I had known, and if he had known earlier that he had some smell triggers, there's a lot of things that we could have done proactively to help him. We could have, depending on what the smell was, eliminate it completely, prepare him ahead of time. Okay, this is, or you're going to be smelling this. Help him to understand that the trigger is something that's not happening, that like PTSD, it's something that's not happening to you right now. This was in your past. Desensitize him to it. So with any of these things, really any of these senses, sometimes they're a trigger for a memory, okay? But more specifically, when I talk about smell sensing, it's not so much in the case of triggering unpleasant memories. I just wanted to bring that story up because it's an important story. But most of the time, a smell, if it's if you notice your child is avoiding a certain smell, it may not be because of a memory trigger, but it just may be too overpowering. Like the sense itself is too overpowering, right? And that can dysregulate them. So, be on the lookout for like certain cooking smells, cleaning supplies, the way other people smell, perfumes, school supplies like markers, glue, anything like that. Unless you know what to look for, you won't necessarily know that that's what's going on. That a smell, think about this, a smell can be so overpowering to a person who has sensory processing issues that it can dysregulate them. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. So sound. Let's talk about sound. Picture a school cafeteria. Now, school cafeterias can be bad for smells, but certainly for sound. And sometimes our homes aren't that much better. I have one of my sensory processing issues is with sound. I am not able to function very well when there's too much sound around. I can't carry on a conversation. I can't pay attention when there's background noise. So when I was younger, school cafeterias were just an absolute nightmare for me. Now, me as a mom of 7 kids, that's a noisy house, right? Large, busy, active house. And so me having sound sensory issues, I required my children to be quieter than what was probably most of their comfort level because I needed that in order to function. And since I homeschooled them, we did a lot of our louder schooling outside so the noise could kind of dissipate, and they could use their outdoor voices outside. So for some of your children, they could also be like that. They could be sensory avoiding, and loud sounds, whether it's a sudden sound or just droning on and on, loud sounds can be very dysregulating. Think about some of your noises in your home: appliances, vacuums, hairdryer, blender. Things that wouldn't bother you will bother a child who has sensory processing issue when it comes to sound. Now, there's another end of this though, the opposite end. Some children are sensory sound seeking. They're the ones who you might notice, if your child is like this, you might notice that they just generate sound on their own. Like they're louder when they talk. They may be drumming things. They may be just whatever they can do to create more sound in their environment. That's a sensory seeking child. My granddaughter, who's 8 years old, she is kind of the opposite with me. We're alike in the fact that we both have sensory processing issues, but she's that sensory seeker. So in fact, just the other day she told me, because she's staying with us this week, and she said, "Bubby, I love being at your house, but it's always so quiet." She goes, "I like those city noises." And so she manufactures city noises all the time. And I had a little conversation with her just today, explaining to her that we're alike in the fact that we both, noises affect us more than it does other people. And I need it quiet, she needs it loud. So just pay attention to that with your children and see if one of them is a sound seeker or a sound avoider. The another sense is taste. Make sure that you're sensitive to your child's taste preferences. Some children are actually sensitive the same way as smell and with sound. They're sensitive to certain tastes. So that may be the picky eater. And your picky eater might not be refusing food because they're trying to control the situation. It may be that that taste is extremely unpleasant to them. Or the child who grabs for the hot sauce to go on everything maybe isn't saying that your casserole doesn't taste good. Maybe they're saying that they need more taste in their life. So again, we want to be that detective and we want to see, okay, are they doing this out of willful disobedience, or are they doing this because there is a taste sensitivity that's making it difficult for them to be regulated. Another one, so visual sight, the visual senses. Some children need to have their environment be what I call visual clutter. They need to have a lot of sights around them in order to keep them regulated. For other children, they need to have a more visually quiet environment. Now, that's another one of my sensory issues. I can't have a lot of visual stimulation going on, or it makes it very difficult for me to concentrate and I get dysregulated. So again, this would be something that you'd want to be a detective and kind of pay some attention to, because our kids aren't going to say this. They're not going to say, I really would like to have a little bit more visual stimulation in my environment. What they may do is dump all their toys on the ground. Not because they're being disrespectful, not because they're, for any other reason other than they need a visually stimulating environment. Other children, when their rooms are too messy, you may not realize it because their rooms are always messy, but they may be dysregulated on the inside because it's visually chaotic for them, but they don't know. The real tragedy is a child who has a really messy room and it's visually chaotic for them, but they don't have the skills of knowing how to clean it up. Next one is touch, tactile. So if you have a child that runs at you at full speed to give you a hug and kind of knocks you down, or a child who's kind of always up in your face, maybe too close to you, always wanting to touch you, well, that is a touch sensory seeker. Okay? Now, for children like that, there's a delicate balance between teaching them good personal boundaries, but also not making them feel ashamed because they need deep touch. My granddaughter is one who needs very, very deep touch. And when she was younger, she would give those full body slams. Just a slight on the arm would send her in conniption fits because that felt really dysregulating to her, but a good squeeze on the arm would actually calm her down. And then the last two senses are those ones that you may not have heard about before. That's proprioception and vestibular. And these are also two general types of body movements that your kids can do that actually increases their ability to regulate. Okay, so let's learn about one of them, proprioceptive system. And to do that, you're going to have to trust me a little bit, okay? Unless you're, when you're watching this video, unless you're in a weird place right now and you can't do this, I want you to stand up, give you time, and then close your eyes. And then I want you to reach out your right arm out to the right side of your body, like airplane arms. Okay, so reach it straight out. And then I want you to put your right index finger, that's your pointer finger, and then with your eyes still closed, bring that finger towards your nose, and then touch your finger to your nose. Okay, then put your finger and your arm down. Again, your eyes are still closed, and repeat that with your left side. Left side out, eyes closed, touch your nose. Okay, now you can open up your eyes and sit back down. Now, without your proprioceptive system working properly, you wouldn't have been able to do that successfully. You wouldn't have been able to know where different parts of your body are without looking. Crazy, right? This system is responsible for helping you move through space and move your body effectively. So it's a very important sense. Often, children who have come from hard places, like our foster and our adopted children, they have deficits in this sense, and that makes it harder for them to stay regulated. So there's some things that we can do to help with this. Research says that just 15 minutes of this proprioceptive activity can regulate a child or an adult for 1 to 2 hours. And I'm going to give you some examples. I'm also going to put it in a PDF for you. I'm going to give you some examples of proprioceptive activities. If you can add a few of these activities to your child's day, this will really help them to be able to help regulate themselves better. For this particular sense, our body receives information through our muscles or our joints. So some proprioceptive activities would be joint compression, stretching, wall push-ups, squeezing a ball, running, jumping, skipping, lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, chewing, sucking, blowing, sweeping, playing leapfrog, tug-of-war, that wheelbarrow walking, hitting, kicking, bouncing, throwing a ball, climbing, crawling, scooting, kneading dough or clay, some outdoor work like raking and sweeping and mowing, roughhousing, wrestling, crashing on the bed, beanbags, pillow fights, weighted vests, lap pads. These are all great proprioceptive activities. And then the last one is the vestibular sense. So the vestibular input coordinates the movements of the eyes, the head, the body, and all of this affects our body's balance, our muscle tone, the spatial visual perception, auditory language perception, and emotional security. So this vestibular system helps us understand where our head and our body are in space. It's all about balance and movement. And all children require this movement and input for proper development. Children who come from hard beginnings, especially of neglect, maybe they weren't rocked early, maybe they weren't picked up often, they will have some difficulties with this vestibular sense. So some activities that can help with this would be swinging, or any kind of linear movement or vertical movements, upside down movements, horizontal movements, challenges to balance, standing on their head, like inverting their head, The game of freeze tag, where there's a lot of stop and start in the motion, changes in direction, changes in speed. So when you're thinking of activities to strengthen your child's brain and therefore decrease their frequency and duration and intensity of meltdowns, there's 6 things to look for. The 6 R's. This is from Dr. Perry's work. First one is relational. These are the experiences that happen inside. Safe, connected, attuned relationship. For example, putting a child on a rocking chair and then you rock with them, okay? Because you're doing it together. The next R is relevant, and that means you need to match it developmentally to the individual. Repetitive, so it's patterned. It needs to happen over and over again. Rewarding means that the activity is pleasurable. Rhythmic means that the activity has a beat to it. And then respectful is being respectful of the child, the family, and the culture. So if you believe that your child has some sensory differences, make sure that you consult an expert in the field rather than just trying to hit or miss on adding some of these activities. But for the most part, anything that adds proprioception input is going to be very regulating to your child. But you do need to be careful, especially with those vestibular activities, so that you don't accidentally get your child overly stimulated, because then that can cause some dysregulation. There's a website that I'll also link to in the PDF that has a lot of great information about these two vestibular and proprioceptive senses, and it's called lemonlimeadventures.com. So, the key for right now is just to begin to be aware that there are many things in your child's environment that will make it harder, could make it harder for them to regulate, and could make them more prone to those meltdowns. And then know that when you can teach young children about sensory processing, you can let them know that they're not a bad kid for having certain things in their environment, certain times of the day maybe, that's just harder for them to keep it together. You know, for them to know that you're on their side even when they're having a really hard day, that can make absolutely all the difference in the world to them and to you. So that's it for today's webinar, and I will be happy to take any questions that you guys have about this. All right, bye-bye.